Walter S. Gerard, Sunday School Director for New Spirit Baptist Church here in Dallas, Texas, where the Reverend Otis Grimes is pastor. And today's lesson for September the 3rd, and I must say it's my birthday, September the 3rd, is Jesus Confronts Hypocrisy. Jesus confronts hypocrisy. And the reference scriptures for this lesson are taken from the Gospel of Luke, the 11th chapter, and the 37th through the 44th verses. Now, this is lesson 1 in our new lesson series, which is called God's Law is Love. And it's lesson 1 in unit 1 of this lesson series, which is called Love Completes, Law Fails. Law falls short. Unit 1, love completes, law falls short. This hypocrisy is something that many people believe Christians are, and we can understand why. Because we have been commissioned to teach everything that Christ taught, and in a nutshell, it's to live holy and to be righteous. That's what it really all boils down to, what we are to teach as Christians. And we know as well as the world knows that nobody can be holy and righteous or sinless all the time. And so as a result, a lot of people regard Christians as hypocrites, because we teach one thing, but we're not able to live what we teach, not completely. But there is a difference between Christians and non-Christians as far as the result of sin. Now, in our printed text, we see that Jesus called the Pharisees hypocrites. Now, the Pharisees were a small sect of Jews in Jesus' time in the world who believed that following the Mosaic law to the letter was the only way to be righteous or right with God. And then they added their own interpretations of the law, which put requirements on the people that were much more than they could keep. Jesus' reasons for calling the Pharisees hypocrites will help us to understand why Christians are not considered hypocrites in God's eyesight, even though we sin too, just like everybody else. Well, maybe not just like everybody else, but everybody sins. Now, reading the scriptures from the New International Version of the Bible, Luke the 11th chapter and the 37th through the 44th verses, is as follows. When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. But the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. Then the Lord said to him, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But now as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. Woe to you Pharisees, because you give a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. Woe to you Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplaces. Woe to you, because you are like unmarked graves, which people walk over without knowing it." May the Lord add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of His holy word. Now, our printed text sets the stage for our lesson. A Pharisee invites Jesus to have a meal with him, and Jesus accepted. And this was after Jesus had been teaching to a lot of the people. Now, he went into the Pharisee's home and reclined at the table. And that would be like we would say today, he sat down at the table. The Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus didn't wash his hands before the meal. Now, we should note here that the law of Moses did indeed make a big deal about clean and unclean animals and touching anything unclean, as we can read in the book of Leviticus, the 11th chapter through the 15th chapter. And it required other ceremonial washings also in Leviticus, and in particular, the 11th chapter and the 28th verse and the 15th chapter and the 4th through the 27th verses. But the Pharisees expanded on the Mosaic law, and they required washing of the hands before every meal. But we should also note that Jesus was not against washing hands before meals, but he wanted to take advantage of an opportunity for a teachable moment. So in verse 39, we see that Jesus said to the Pharisee that they, the Pharisees that is, clean the outside of the cup or the dish, but on the inside they are full of greed and wickedness. In other words, they make an outside show of being godly and righteous, but in their hearts they are evil and always taking advantage of others to increase their own wealth. He then calls them foolish people and reminds them in so many words that God made them inside and outside. This suggests that God sees their outward appearance as well as their inward thoughts and motives. He wanted them to he wanted them to live godly and holy lives both on the outside, that is, that people see, and on the inside, that is, that people don't see. And again, God sees all. He sees both. As a reminder, Jesus was speaking to a Pharisee. However, this applies to us also. God knows our inmost thoughts. In verse 41, we see that God tells a Pharisee, and us for that matter, what should be in their hearts or in our hearts, inside us. Be generous to the poor, he says. This is one way to correct the greed and wickedness that was in their hearts and in some of ours. He says that then they would be clean. And we understand this to mean clean on the inside and the outside. If we have this in our hearts, being generous to the poor, then we will have love for our fellow human beings, which sums up God's commandments: to love one another, to love God, and then to love one another. Our printed text ends with 3 woes for the Pharisees. Now, when the Bible speaks of the word or uses the word woe, it's used to say that something bad is going to happen, usually as a consequence or punishment for some ill-advised behavior. The first woe was because the Pharisees paid their tithes of mint, rue, and other garden herbs, but didn't show justice and the love of God. He basically says that justice and love of God are more important than paying tithes. That justice and the love of God is what they were not practicing, but should have been practicing, while at the same time paying their tithes. Now, we should note that when Jesus said this, he was speaking to a Jew who was still under the old covenant law, which required tithing. He had not yet established the new covenant in his blood. Tithing is not required under the new covenant, but the love of God is. Also, as Dr. Derek E. Reeves, who is senior pastor of St. John Baptist Church in Corpus Christi, Texas, told me, we should always look for the principles in the old covenant that can be applied to the new covenant. So the principle of tithing does apply to Christians. The second woe is because the Pharisees loved the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplaces. In other words, they wanted to be regarded as better than everyone else, a cut above everybody else, as we might say these days. God wants us to be humble and regard others more than ourselves. Jesus said that the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the one who humbles himself. You read it in Matthew, the 18th chapter and the 4th verse. And then the third woe, in the last verse of our printed text, verse 44. He tells the Pharisee that they cause others to be unclean with their hypocrisy without even knowing it. And he uses the metaphor of stepping on an unmarked grave unknowingly to help make his point. In the law of Moses, if a Jew touched a dead body, that Jew would be unclean. And anything that Jew touched would be unclean. And this included a grave where a dead body was buried. We can understand that our own hypocrisy can cause others to live sinful lives. If we pretend to be Christians and then live our lives in a sinful way in front of everybody when we're not at church or around our Christian friends, those who are watching us, especially those who are babes in the faith, will imitate our hypocrisy. A lot of us don't realize it, but our children know us better than we know ourselves sometimes. They don't see how we act when we're in church, and then they see how we act the rest of the week in front of others. And they'll imitate those actions. They'll act like Christians in church and then turn around and use all kind of bad words, bad language in the rest of the week. The original Greek word that meant hypocrite meant an actor or character in a play, someone who acts like someone else. But it evolved to include real life situations, someone who pretends to be something in real life that they are not. When it comes to being holy and righteous, God does not like us being hypocrites. He wants us to be holy and righteous on the inside and on the outside for real, not acting. Jesus confronts hypocrisy. I hope you've gained at least one thought from this Sunday school lesson. May God bless you and may He ever keep you.